For many of us who have studied a musical instrument, the idea of performing on stage brings up thoughts of anxiousness and nervousness. So many musicians have had the experience of sounding great in the practice room, only to have nerves get in the way on stage and sabotage what was supposed to be a stellar performance. This Sunday, October 16th at 2 p.m. at Fort Garry Mennonite Fellowship Church, the Manitoba Registered Music Teachers Association will be presenting a workshop called Performance Preparation: Strategies for Consistency and Confidence. The lecture will be led by University of Manitoba piano professor Dr. Darryl Friesen. And here to tell us more about this lecture, I am joined here over Zoom by Dr. Darryl Friesen. Hi, Darryl. It's nice to meet you here over Zoom.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Mm-hmm. So the idea for the lecture is so great. Whose idea was it to put this together? Was it yours or was it the MRMTA's?
No, MRMTA contacted me and they just said, hey, we're wondering, would you ever want to come do a workshop for us? And I'm part of the MRMTA. I've been a huge supporter of their work for years. And I just kind of tossed out some ideas because they sent out a survey last year. And I said, well, here are a few things. And they contacted me and said, well, take your pick. Here's what we got on our survey. And I thought, performance preparation. That's something we can all relate to. It does not matter if you're a pianist, which I am, or not. We have all been there, just like you said. The
Yeah,
intended stellar performance that never happened, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So briefly, without giving too much away, what can people expect from the lecture on Saturday?
Well, for one thing, I want it to be as interactive as possible. So we're for sure going to have a good solid chunk for Q&A at the end of the session. I think that that's a really, really important thing. Again, I'm expecting, sort of because of how they're advertising it, that it might be many pianists there, but for whoever happens to come, it doesn't matter what your discipline is. I want to leave lots of room for that. But then what I'd like to present on is just some of the things that I regularly do with both my students, my piano students in the studio, but also with the musicianship students that I teach at university. So the musicianship course, of course, encapsulates like the oral aspect of our training and developing our ear and those kinds of things. But it's so closely related to how we would prepare for performance on our given instrument or voice. So I'm going to do a lot of what I regularly do, which would include some practice techniques that we can actually do in the practice room that will help us prepare well for performance, techniques of different kinds. But then a lot of it also will include what I've learned about the psychology of performance. So I will be the first one to say that clearly I'm not a healthcare professional or doctor of that type. But I feel like there are a lot of psychological things that we can do to help us. And I actually attended a really great conference a couple of years ago that did a huge section of the conference in comparing sports psychology to music psychology and how much overlap there actually is. And I think that we all have sort of an abstract knowledge that that could be true, but they unpacked the specifics of how that can work, and I learned a ton. So I'm certainly not going to plagiarize any one source, but those are some of the things that I'd like to cover.
Mm-hmm. I had a friend of mine when I was in my undergrad say, you can get over nerves by just performing more. It's just, the more you do it, the easier it gets. For you, how did you get over nerves? Like, you must have had nerves early on. Do you still get them? And how do you personally deal with them?
That's a great question. I will definitely say that I think it is easier when students start performing before they're highly self-aware. So I think that if you get like a little 7 or 8-year-old performing on stage, the likelihood that they might experience a bit of nerves, but that they're just going to be so excited to be up on stage, that actually solves a lot of what you have to work on later if performing starts later in your development as a musician. Right. So clearly it's not insurmountable and anything like that, but it is true that I started performing when I was not self-aware. I didn't have a hot clue what I was doing. I just thought, I get to be on stage. And so I thought that was the greatest thing. So maybe that then made my teenage years, when things kind of fell apart once in a while on stage because of a lack of good preparation. I couldn't just kind of roll on energy and excitement anymore in the same way, right? The pieces get harder, longer, more complex, and suddenly you do need to actually develop some strategies for how it's going to work. It can't just be the love of the stage, right?
Right.
So that would be more my experience, though. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that struck me in the title is The lecture is called Performance Preparation, Consistency, and Confidence. It's the consistency piece I want to deal with. I mean, it's one thing to perform for friends and relatives like you might on a student recital. It's a completely other thing to perform in front of an unforgiving jury.
Mhm.
What kinds of things do you do with your own students to sort of build up that consistency of performance?
Well, so besides some of the actual kind of specifics we'll discuss at the workshop itself, another thing that I think that sports psychologists and athletes do generally a lot better than musicians do is they have a much more developed, maybe because they are more intentional, maybe it's because it's what they do and it's the technique they use, but they're way more intentional at being able to take an objective step back and just observing and looking at the process. What worked in performance? What worked in the practicing that you thought would work in the performance? Analyze it, don't take it personally, stay objective. And I feel like for very obvious reasons, musicians find that really hard to do because our art is so personal to us. So the just already recognizing that we have to be able to take a step back without any insecurity and without feeling picked on, the developing of thick skin, actually just recognizing everyone will bring strengths and weaknesses to the table. That's not personal either. Just accept it and then work intentionally at developing it. I think that that mentality is very challenging, again, for someone with your art being very personal to you, but I think it's a really, really necessary part of it. So I often do that with my students. Okay, what do you already fear about the performance? What are you already excited about for the performance? And then we actually condition and strategize through their lessons leading to the performance on the things they already know going in have maybe not worked as well in the past as they'd like, or things they actively fear and worry about.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
One of the other jobs of a music teacher is not simply to teach the instrument straight up. I think one of the other jobs is to teach a student how to practice in a way that's productive and efficient. What are some of the common problems in regards to practice habits that you regularly see with your own students? Like, I'm sure you've walked down the halls of the University of Manitoba and heard people practicing, and it's like, they're playing that rhythm of the Beethoven Sonata wrong, or they're playing it too fast. What are some common
Oh no, that never happens at
issues?
university. We are professional practicers when we get to university. No, no, no. Yes, what you're saying is true. So I think that a huge part of it is it's related, of course, to the consistency, but it's related to understanding what the different types of memory are. That's one of the big things we're going to talk about at the workshop. When we understand the different types of memory that we use in performance and that we prepare for in practicing, that actually informs our practice tremendously. And it actually really, really changes the way we practice. So I think a lot of students, I will definitely be in that category from when I remember being a student. I remember so frequently feeling like, okay, I've done my run through. It went okay. I know it's not what I want it to be in performance, but I actually don't know how to improve it. So I know it could be improved, but I don't know how to improve it. And I feel like developing these understandings of the different types of memory that I'm going to need in performing really helps the students stay specific in their practicing, which means that their practicing will be more efficient, which means it will be less discouragement because they'll be able to track progress way better. Because the worst thing is when you practice and don't see progress. Then it feels very, very disheartening. So all of those things and kind of tracking what can we do in the practice room to not need to practice 5 hours a day? What if you only had to practice 2 hours a day and you could actually get everything that you needed to get done? Wouldn't that be amazing? So those kinds of things. And then learning again, getting back to the oral skill idea, learning how it is that we do and don't listen to ourselves critically and analytically in our practicing is another huge part of the puzzle. And again, not restricted to discipline, it's every discipline, and learning how to do that well.
Yeah, absolutely. Darryl, performance preparation strategies for consistency and confidence sounds like it's going to be really, really interesting and worthwhile. Where can people go to register?
I'm leaving all of these details up to the MRMTA, who have been such lovely, wonderful, communicative hosts with me so far in arranging everything. So I'm going to just defer everyone to the MRMTA website. I think that I've seen flyers around in various places, but the website is mrmta.org. And I think that things like pricing, Location, venue, time, all those kinds of things. It's all on the website. So I'm just going to say check the website out and it will give you the information that you need.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. And for our Classic 107 listeners, I'll embed a direct link to the registration site on our website, classic107.com. It'll be embedded in the article that I'll put there. Also, for those interested, I actually have the costs written down here. For MRMTA members, it's $10. For non-members of the Manitoba Registered Music Teachers Association, it's $20. And for students, it's just $5. So the price is absolutely right. Darryl, this has just been great. All the best on Sunday. And thanks so much for stopping by and telling us about this amazing lecture.